Monday, April the 17th meeting of the Union County Board of Commissioners. And if you'd like, I've got the invocation night, so if you'd like to, please join me. Dear Heavenly Father, we appreciate the ability to come here and do the work for the people of Union County. We hope that you would be with us all in our decisions and help that we make wise decisions for the citizens. And please be with us all as we travel home. And in your name we pray, amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we did not have anyone registered for informal comments. Anybody just neglect to do that? Anybody wanted to speak? Okay. Come to the lectern, and what's your name and your where do you live?
Ryan Dexter, Union County.
Come on up to the microphone.
Yes. You said Brian?
Ryan.
Ryan?
Ryan Dexter, Union County.
Okay. What part?
3006 Beaver Dam Drive, Monroe, 28110.
Okay. And the subject?
I want to talk about armed security in public schools.
Okay.
Oh, right now? Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, is this going to be something that we are going to be debating? I spoke to the sheriff, and he had said that it would literally take 2 cents to raise our taxes to get armed security in every public school. I would like this to be up for debate. I am for this. I have small children, ages 3 and 6, and I believe that they deserve the same armed security as Congress. And this is something you guys are going to take up. I just want to know.
You said, are we going to take it?
Yeah, are we going to be, or is this something you guys are going to consider?
Yeah, we've I know the sheriff has on the budget this year. Do you know?
So
Okay.
the Union County Public Schools has been working on this for years. There are 53 schools, all middle schools and all high schools have armed SROs. Of the 30 elementary schools, I believe there are 9 schools that are actually sharing an SRO right now. We were discussing in our joint meeting last month with the school board that they would request in the budget this year to have 4 additional SROs hired, and then we would have 5 more needed for the next budget, and then all 53 schools would have an SRO.
Okay.
So and again, this board has not been presented with the manager's budget as of yet, but that is the conversation we had last month with Union County Public Schools.
So as far as taxes go, I mean, what kind of increase would this be for the, yeah?
So regarding taxes, the other complication that has been explained to us by Sheriff Kathy is that logistically, he can't hire that many people all at one time and purchase vehicles, all of the equipment, and send them to SRO school on top of all of their law enforcement training. And it was actually his plan that he worked with Dr. Houlihan in Union County Public Schools. I think they've been working on this for it was a 3-year plan, and then COVID hit. And so they came back last year, and so we're in the final stages of getting those last 9 slots filled. So the goal is to get 4 slots filled this year, and hiring, just like everywhere, is extremely difficult right now. But with the additional equipment and training and vehicles, that's what Sheriff Kathy communicated to us, that he felt like doing 4 in this budget and 5 in the next budget, and then all 53 schools would be covered.
Okay, and so what does that look like from the normal tax resident? Do you guys have any indication?
We have deputies, so,
Okay.
I mean, it's just, if he allocates those deputies to schools or where he allocates those deputies to, there's some things we can fund, but as you said, funding them and hiring, for example, EMS and EMTs, we have several spots open for paramedics, things like that we can't hire them. Teachers, we have positions for even teachers in schools that we're not able to hire, but there has been a plan and works for a long time. It's not even pre-COVID, we've been planning on
Okay,
this.
so we do, as a county, have the funding then?
Yes.
Essentially, we just need the manpower, right?
Yes.
You just can't hire 53 people all at one time.
Yeah.
Okay.
But like I said, up until about 4 or 5 years ago, all the middle schools and all the high schools did have SROs. It was the 30 elementary schools that brought us to the table with Sheriff Kathy to put together like a 3-year plan on how to get those 30 schools covered. And now that we're coming back from COVID, I can't remember if he hired 7 or 8 in last year's budget. This year, he's asking for 4, and next year he's asking for 5. And that's based on his recommendation about what he thinks, how he thinks he can hire those people, find those people, and get them through SRO school and all the vehicle purchases and everything else. So, but as far as taxes, that safety and security issue has never really been about how many pennies are we going to raise taxes, because we all agree that the schools need to be covered.
Okay, and one last thing. Is there any public-private partnership as far as, because we do have private schools in Union County, is there something that they could take advantage of that and kind of take that?
Go ahead.
So typically, private schools would have to contract for that service on their own. The sheriff's deputies are allowed to actually work after hours or on those types of jobs. So they would contract for that on their own.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
One other thing, and we normally don't do a question and answer during public comments.
Okay.
But this is important for the community. So what you have is a question that a lot of people have. And, some other good things is in North Carolina, we have a lot of the private schools and the, even charter schools that may have law enforcement that are there during traffic times and during other times of the day. We could have teachers. When I was in high school, we had a teacher that was a highway patrolman, and anybody that's a law enforcement officer can carry their firearms, even if they're working in a different capacity anywhere in the state. So there's some other things that are out there that people may not be aware of, and we're very fortunate that we have pretty safe schools here. We just had an arrest of a drug transaction and a drug dealer just the other day at one of our schools because of the SRO was so watchful of what was going on. So we're very fortunate and want you and your kids to feel safe.
Thank you. Appreciate the time, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, next we have a public hearing, none. Consent agenda. Anyone have an item they want to take off of the consent agenda? All right, then I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda as published.
All right, any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay. Next, we have item 23-122, US 74 Express Bus Service Partnership Update. Bjorn?
Evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Manager Matthews. I am here to present an update to an item that you heard in January regarding our transit operations here in Union County and the express bus service that has been under study since early 2022. The background is that we have had a service for almost 20 years in a partnership with Charlotte Transit System in Union County. It has stops currently in Monroe and Indian Trail. Historically did have stops to the east in Marshville and Wingate. And this is a service that is 50-50, so we pay 50%. And of that 50%, we use federal grants to pay for half of that. And ridership had been declining pre-COVID, and then during COVID, it declined a lot. It's coming back, but not very much, and the world has changed, and we don't expect ridership to get back where it was before. So we asked for the opportunity to evaluate options to determine if this is the best use of our limited transit dollars, because Union County Transportation has increasing requests for their demand response service. So there were 6 options we looked at, and these are in priority order. So the first one is to expand our hours of operation for existing Union County Transportation. They don't operate in the evenings, they don't operate on weekends. And then the second option after that is to maintain our existing express bus service, and there was a caveat to that if CATS was able to integrate the service with the Matthews Express. Now, at the time, that was assuming that the prior commitment by Monroe to assist in the local match still existed, and that subsequently changed, and that's why we're bringing this back to you. The third option is the flip side of that, which is that if we fail at that integration opportunity, we shouldn't implement the route or continue the route. CATS was very helpful and flexible and worked with us, and we were able to negotiate a cost savings. However, we were kind of partially successful because we didn't get the Monroe commitment. The last strategy that was recommended and you agreed with was the microtransit service, which is a future endeavor. It requires a study, and it would be implemented as a pilot service and only done if the towns or municipalities of Monroe and possibly Wingate approached the county and said, we want this. We can't want it more than they do, is really the mindset. And so this was agreed to. So again, we worked with CATS over several meetings, went through some options and implications of integrating routes. It's the first time they've done something like this. The bottom line is that it does result in a savings, approximately 1/3 of the initial cost. The rider fare would actually be reduced to $3, and the reason why is because this is a route that's integrated with a route inside Mecklenburg County, and an express bus service that only goes within Mecklenburg County is $3. And so recognizing that this route would also be longer because it now deviates through downtown Monroe, it's a longer route, so as kind of an olive branch, we felt that us paying the incremental difference to allow this integrated route to exist was a good trade-off. And so the cost of the rider would reduce to $3 a trip, but their trip would take a little bit longer. However, they would have 2 opportunities for stops, either in downtown Matthews or at the park and ride lot along US 74, just north of 485. And during this process, we did receive formal feedback from the city of Monroe that they will not contribute funding to the express bus service in FY24. And that's why it's scheduled to you here. What we have is a slide of the trade-offs, the pluses and minuses of keeping versus canceling the service. The express bus service was supported by public comment, even people who weren't riding the service. They liked knowing that the option was available. Keeping the express bus service as we have negotiated the new route reduces the cost to the riders and to the county, and it does increase transit options, but we didn't meet your direction of municipal support. It is a longer trip, and ridership is still down. So those are the negatives, and then you can essentially reverse those if you talk about canceling the express bus service. We have more money for our existing demand response service, and it does reflect the reality that there's lower ridership than there was several years ago. So we brought this to you for your direction, and we can execute based on this. I will note that if you were to take action tonight to cancel the service, it doesn't mean that the service will stop tomorrow. That will probably not happen until September or October, because the CAT system coordinates all kinds of changes together and bundles them to take them out to the public at one time. And this would involve public outreach and modifying their scheduling process. So it would still operate until the fall, which is appropriate because the riders need to be able to adjust their commuting options if the service is terminated. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. We also have Teresa Torres, Director of Union County Transportation, available to answer any questions as well.
County Manager Brian Matthews.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So, and the staff did not give you an official recommendation, but it would be my recommendation that we actually cancel the express bus service. Thank you.
And no municipalities have shown interest in participating, correct?
In financially funding?
Right,
No, sir.
okay. So, and who did we have before? It was Indian Trail? They've been asked and they're not willing to fund or not interested.
That's correct.
We've got Monroe, not interested.
That's correct.
Wingate,
They don't have a stop.
right, but they wouldn't be interested in getting one
No.
either, correct? Okay, so everybody along 74, nobody's got a stop.
Well,
so-
we only formally asked Indian Trail and Monroe. We didn't think that changing the stops was appropriate. Monroe is really about the end of a concentration of people who would use it to go to Charlotte.
Okay. All right. Most of our, let's see, riders, you said Ms. Torres is here.
She is.
Can you come up, please?
Good evening.
The riders that we have, do you have any indication of where, are they going to a job? Are they going to shop? Are they going to entertainment, hospital? What kind of idea of what
All
those
of the
ri-
above.
all
So
of the-
currently, we are 18 years or older.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who wants to go shopping, to the medical facility, recreation, getting their hair done, shopping trips, work trips, all within Union County. We do medical trips into Charlotte.
Okay, that's, I guess, where I'm getting at. So if it's a medical trip to Mecklenburg County, you would take those.
We take medical and VA.
But the bus service, I guess, do you do anything with the bus service of the ridership? Are they going to work or are they going to recreate in Charlotte? I mean, you said we have a very few number of people doing it, but it's not that they're going to the hospital. We would take them to the hospital in
Correct.
Charlotte if they needed to go.
I can't answer like who's taking that bus route on 74X. I do not know the reasons why they would be going.
Okay, but as far as our service, we would take them to hospital appointments, to things of that nature.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have a question? Or
Just one quick question. As far as the concentration of the ridership that we have for this program, do we have any indication as to, where these folks live in the county? Or are they, concentrated more so in this one area, in this municipality perhaps? Or do we have any indication about where the ridership is coming from, our existing ridership?
Are you talking about
Bjorn,
for
that might
Union
be-
County transportation or the 74X?
The 74 Express, I think, is what he's
Yeah,
asking.
Correct,
Bjorn, you
yes.
might have that.
It varies over time, but it's approximately 50-50 between the Indian Trail and the Monroe stops, and it's a combination of unincorporated and municipal. So it's really a broad group of people, but it's not concentrated in any one location.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody want to make a recommendation on that?
I'd like to make a motion that we cancel the 74 express bus service.
All right, any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. All right, next we have the 23-214 Comprehensive Water Wastewater Master Plan Update. Brian Matthews.
Yes, sir. So, some time ago, the county contracted with Brown and Caldwell to start a master plan for our water and sewer service. The last one was an update in 2016, and it was time for us to revisit that, provide the board with some information about how our capacities look, what the future looks like for water and sewer. So we have Mr. Jay Fulmer with Brown and Caldwell here to give you an update on the master plan. There are still other items that they will come back to you with some additional information. This is for information only. You don't have to make any decisions today. But I did want to introduce Mr. Jay Fulmer and turn it over to him. Thank you very
All right.
much.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening, everybody. All right, so what we'll be going through today, first give you a quick update on the master plan schedule, quickly address growth projections in service areas. We've talked about those on a couple of previous board meetings. Then we're going to drill into system configuration alternatives and interbasin transfer projections. I'll talk about more what that is in a moment. That's a fairly complex bit of the presentation. Then we'll look at water treatment plant capacity assessment. So what we're going to look at is what your water treatment plant capacity is versus expected new demands from future growth. And then we'll do the same with the wastewater treatment plant capacity assessment, and then we'll wrap up with next steps. All right, for master plan schedule update, this graphic is showing the basic components of the master plan. Items shown in green are completed. So we finished through the capacity assessment, and we're actively working on the alternatives analysis. You'll actually see some of that this evening. The remaining items to finish is we need to develop a capital improvements plan to address the capacity gaps that we identify as part of the capacity assessment, and then ultimately document the master plan for publication. So as far as remaining schedule, we're going to be presenting a good bit of the capacity assessment tonight, focusing on the treatment plants. On the May 1st meeting, we're going to present the capacity assessment for the water distribution and wastewater collection system. Just had to break it up. It's a lot of information. And so on May 1st, we're going to be talking about pipes. Just tonight, we're going to be talking about plants. We're targeting May 15th to have the proposed capital improvements plan presented at that meeting, and then targeting early July to wrap up master plan and have that finalized. So any questions on that before we proceed? All right. Growth projections and service area. This is just kind of a reminder. When we're looking at what future flows will be due to growth in the county, we've been consistent with the 2050 comprehensive plan. So we're synchronized with that. In most cases, we got specific input from the towns that we use to augment growth projections. So where we could use town-specific data, we did, and I think that was in most cases. I think Unionville might have been the only one we didn't have some specific data for. So we apply that growth to look at what demands that puts on your water distribution system. So an important concept is the water distribution service area. So that's the area shown in blue overlaid on the county. You can think of that as the boundaries for the planning study and the boundaries for the service area. The reason we set these boundaries is to construct and extend water service outside of those areas generally is going to require more than just running a pipe. It'll be things like maybe increasing pump station size, building new water towers. It's much more involved to go outside of the service areas where you already have the infrastructure to provide service. Similarly, this is the wastewater collection service area, smaller than the water service area. But again, the reason these boundaries are important is because with wastewater service, to build something outside of these boundaries to provide wastewater service out of these boundaries is generally going to require building a pump station and a force main to get the wastewater to a treatment plant versus inside these boundaries, generally you're going to have gravity flow that you just have to connect to. So that's just telling you that just so you can see kind of the limitations of the study where we're expecting growth. All right, we'll also look at facility assumptions. First, we're going to look at water. I'll tell you, this is going to be more relevant on May 1st, so I'll repeat it at that one, but just to kind of give you a quick intro. When we say facility assumptions, these are things we assume are going to be in place. These are givens, if that makes sense. So on the water side, of course, the Yadkin treatment plant and the associated transmission mains for 853 and 762. That's to get the water out of the plant into the system. Also, an 853 transmission main. Two things that would not be in service would be Olive Branch Booster Pump Station, that's what that acronym stands for, and Highway 74 Booster Pump Station. Both of those facilities are associated with bringing water from Anson into your system. With the new plant, that they're no longer needed, so we just assume them not to be operating. And the last one is we're assuming that you're not building the new Indian Trail tank, and that's kind of weird, but the reason we're doing that is because we suspect you guys need that tank, but what we decided to do for analysis is leave it out and let the analysis tell us how big does it need to be and what its priority needs to be, so we can make a decision later about how soon that needs to be built. So it seems odd we're leaving something out that you know you need, but there's logic behind it. All right, on the wastewater side, there are some things that are going to impact what we're going to see tonight, or it will be different than what you've seen in some previous planning presentations. So starting up at the top, the Crooked Creek Interceptor Phase 2, that's this sewer line running up the middle of the Crooked Creek Basin. We're assuming that will be constructed. West Fork Interceptor, Waxhaw Interceptor, Pump Station, and Force Main. Where things get different than maybe what you've seen in previous planning is we understand that the new treatment plant that would have been located here just east of Poplin's basically been put on indefinite hold. With that, two things had to change. One, Crooked Creek treatment plant needs to remain in service. Under earlier planning activities, that would have basically been taken offline with the new plant. The new plant would have taken on that flow. The other thing that needs to happen is the Poplin Road Pump Station and Flow EQ. That flow also would have eventually wound up at the new plant, but now that flow is going to have to continue to go to 12 Mile. So when we're looking at some flow projections and IBT information later, you may see some results that are different than what you've seen in previous planning. That's why I'm pointing this out, and we'll go over what those are specifically as we get to that. All right, so system configuration alternatives and interbasin transfer projections. When I say system configuration alternatives, what I mean is which areas of your water system are served by which plant. You'll have two plants eventually, Catawba and Yadkin. So system configuration just means what areas are served by which plant, and we'll walk through that, what that means. But this is an area where this has a huge impact on compliance with your interbasin transfer certificates. That's why we're grouping these two things together. So we'll dive in. So to select the system configuration, we have two main criteria we need to look at. One of them is compliance with your interbasin transfer certificate and the associated regulations. You'll see in a moment that's a little complicated. This is a large system, and it's connected with other large systems, and what happens in the water system and what happens in the wastewater system affects the IBT, and we'll go through what that means in a moment. We also, provided we satisfy compliance with those regulations, we'd like to maximize the use of each plant's capacity. So in other words, if we could take demand off of Catawba and put it on Yadkin, that would be preferred because you're sharing the load of the water. But you have to satisfy both criteria. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about IBT so everybody understands kind of all the working parts. So interbasin transfer means the regulation of water from one river basin to another. And you have to have a certificate to do that, and you have two. Union County is, I guess, crossed, or Union County sits on top of, however you want to say it, three different river basins. So starting over here to the east is the Catawba River Basin. That's where the Catawba River water plant is. That's also where the drinking water from Catawba comes from. It comes from the Catawba River. In the middle, you have the Rocky River Basin, and that's about 2/3 of the county sits inside the Rocky River Basin. And then to the east, you had the Yadkin River Basin, and that's where your new water supply comes from via Lake Tillery. So pumped from Lake Tillery over to the Yadkin water plant. So from a regulatory perspective, you have two certificates. You have one certificate for 5 MGD, that stands for 5 million gallons per day, that you can bring from the Catawba Basin, go over the hill, so to speak, into the Rocky River Basin. That's the transfer that you're making, is when it goes over that ridge line, which is these lines separating the basins. You also have a new IBT from Yadkin to Rocky, and that's for 23 million gallons per day. And again, that is from Yadkin to Rocky River. So both IBTs put water into the Rocky River Basin. One element of this that's not part of the IBT, but has a big influence on some of the numbers we're going to see in a moment, is the Poplin Road Pump Station. So Poplin Road Pump Station currently does, and for the foreseeable future, will discharge to the 12 Mile Creek treatment plant. That water winds back up in the Catawba River. That's where it goes. So what that effectively does is water from the Poplin Road Pump Station acts as a credit. You're putting water back into Catawba River, if that makes sense. So That'll be important in a moment when we start looking at some of the math and how the IBT works out. But let me pause there. Any questions, anything you'd want more information on before we proceed? This is an important piece to have our
Any
heads
questions?
around.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so we're going to look at 3 different system configuration alternatives. Don't worry about these descriptions. We're going to have maps here in a moment to go through these in detail, but we're going to look at 3. And we're going to look at 2 different scenarios that we need to satisfy the IBT regulations. First scenario is what we're calling wet season conditions. So that means low water demand, high sewer flow. So an example, if you were in, say, late fall or winter and had a really rainy month, right? Water demand's going to be low because you're probably not irrigating anyway, and you're definitely not irrigating when it's raining. Well, that's going to bring your water demand down, right? The rain, some of that rainfall winds up in the sewer, okay? And that's going to push your sewer flow relatively high. So that's what we mean by wet season conditions, relatively low water demand, relatively high sewer demand. Dry season conditions is the exact opposite. That is like middle of July, no rain. People are irrigating to keep their landscaping looking nice. And sewer flows, because there's no rain, is just that base sewer flow. There's no extra. So sewer flows are relatively low, water demand's relatively high. You have to satisfy the IBT requirements for both conditions. So we're going to look at both, and you'll see the results here in a moment. All right, so let's look at the different system configurations. These are the choices we had, and we're going to have a recommendation here in a moment. So what we have on the map is these are your individual service areas. These are called pressure zones. Each one generally has a little different pressure, hence the name. Option 1, or alternative 1, is what we're calling baseline. This is the easy one. What we would do is take 853 West and 762 and assign them to the Yadkin River plant, and then everything else in green would be assigned to Catawba. These boundaries already naturally exist, so that's easy to segregate those areas that way. There's a couple of other pieces of information on this that you'll see in subsequent slides I want to go over. First is this dashed red line. That is the basin boundary between Catawba and Rocky River. So remember, water going over that basin boundary is a transfer, so that's why that boundary is important. The second thing that's important is this area outlined in orange. That is the tributary area for the Popland Road pump station. So any water or sewer really, generated in that basin comes back to the Catawba River via that pump station going to 12 Mile Creek. So it's important to keep an eye on that as we go through this. So that's the base alternative. Don't have to do much to make this work, maybe some valving and switch things over. Option 1 doesn't look like a big change, but it is. We're taking this little area in the northeast that's currently part of 853 West, and what we're basically going to do is make it part of 853 East. We're going to close some valves over here, open some valves over here, and we may have to put some pipe in. But effectively what we're going to do is we're going to feed that area from Yadkin is what we're doing. So we're taking demand off Catawba, moving it to Yadkin by reshaping that service area boundary. And you can also see that now some of Popland is being served by Yadkin water in this. But otherwise, that's the really only change, is we're moving some demand over. So next option, we're calling option 2. I should have numbered these 1, 2, 3, I think, in hindsight. But anyway, this is the third alternative. We're calling it option 2. This one, we're going to take the 853 West area and basically split it in half at the basin boundary. So we're going to take the part that's to the east of the basin boundary, put it with Catawba, the rest of it, put it with Yadkin. The rest remains with the Catawba Basin. So versus option 1, this is taking even more demand and putting it on Yadkin, taking it off Catawba is the shift that's being made there. So those are the 3 alternatives. Let's look and see what it does to the IBT, because remember, we're looking at a couple of different things, but we have to be compliant with IBT. That's non-negotiable. So first up, we're going to look at the Yadkin River to Rocky River IBT projections. So let me explain what you're looking at here. First of all, remember your IBT from Yadkin to Rocky is 23 MGD. That's how much you can send over. So what you're seeing is for each option, wet season, dry season, you're seeing the projected IBT for each alternative. And you can see they're all in green. The reason for that is all of them are well below the 23 MGD limit. So for the Yadkin to Rocky IBT, all of them work great. You're in compliance with IBT for wet season and dry season conditions for all three alternatives. So really nothing to differentiate here. You're in compliance. It gets more interesting when we look at the Catawba to Rocky River IBT. So we're looking at the same information or the same presentation of information. These are all the alternatives for wet and dry season, and we're showing you the resultant projected IBT out to the year 2040. So for the IBT for Catawba, remember, your ceiling is 5 MGD. One thing we haven't talked about is you also don't want to go negative. And that can happen, and we're going to walk through what that means in a moment. But let's walk through each alternative. So for baseline, for wet season, you're in pretty good shape. You max out at 1.7 MGD, well below the 5 MGD threshold, no issue. For dry season, not so much. Dry season, you can get through 2025 and probably the late 2020s, and then you start exceeding 5 MGD. That's why that data is shown highlighted in red, because that's in excess of the IBT. So the baseline alternative would work for a while, but not long-term, is the conclusion there. Option 2 works great for both wet season and dry season. So for wet season, you're below 1 MGD. You've got, I'm sorry?
Option 1.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Option 1, you're well below 1 MGD for wet season, and for dry season, you're below 5 MGD, even out into 2040. So you probably go a little bit beyond 2040 with these projections. So option 1 works great. Option 2 is the one that's problematic. So for dry season, option 2 looks great. But for wet season is where it's problematic. What's happening in the wet season is more flow is coming back to Catawba via Poplar Road than you sent over in the first place. So that means you're putting more water back in Catawba than you took out. And what that really means is you've got Yadkin water going to Catawba, and that's not the way the IBT is written. So option 2 is a problem for that, and that's why we're going to throw that one out, basically. So I'll wrap this up and we got time for questions. I know I just gave y'all a lot of stuff. So what we're recommending is go with option 1. That provides the best management of IBT limits. There are other things you could do long-term that would be some considerably more expensive, but worth considering is you could move something like 853 South into the Yadkin, but that would take quite a bit of piping to do that because you're going to have to run pipe from the Yadkin area down to this 853 South. So it's a very expensive option. Maybe that's something that's long-term to consider, but immediately that would be kind of hefty. So let me pause there. That's a lot on IBT. Any questions or anything you want to drill into?
Any questions? I have a question. So Monroe, which is the big blank area there, we have some capacity in Monroe's plant. What's the current capacity, Brian?
Our contract's 2.65 for wastewater. He's talking about water, but yes, for wastewater, the contract's 2.65.
Does any of that enter into part of our contract that we can use?
It does not, because that wastewater stays in Rocky River. It doesn't go to Catawba. That's
Correct. So there's no, it doesn't help, doesn't hurt,
It does neither. It
no
does
benefit at all?
no benefit. It's
Okay.
the thing that would benefit is if you could somehow put Poplar Road wastewater flow, keep it in Catawba. Keep it in Rocky River would help.
So that's what I'm saying. If we could put any of that into our capacity in Monroe, that wouldn't help?
I guess you physically could do it. You would be running a very long force main to get it there.
If you recall, we did evaluate what it would take to actually send that to that plant And it would take a significant amount of infrastructure to do that because we don't have the infrastructure in place, neither does Monroe, in order to take that flow.
So they're on the edges where Monroe touches almost that Crooked Creek plant.
Yeah, but.
There's not enough pipe size or not any ability there.
No, and their plant couldn't take it. Poplin's a pretty large facility. I think in 2025, you'd be looking at, don't quote me, but somewhere in the ballpark of a 1.8 MGD coming out of there.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? Go ahead. Huh?
We got lots more, yeah. Buckle up. All right, the rest of them are a little bit faster, I promise. We'll stop nerding out on this stuff. So now we're going to talk about the water supply and treatment capacity. So we'll look at your capacity versus the expected growth. But wanted to tee up what water capacity looks like now and what it'll look like in the near future. So current conditions, you're getting 20 MGD that's shared from the Catawba River plant that you share with Lancaster County. You have an additional 3 MGD lease from them that'll expire once the Yadkin plant is activated. You also have a 4 MGD purchase agreement from Anson that'll terminate later this year, also because that's being replaced by the Yadkin water supply. And then the Yadkin plant is 0 right now, but will be 12 MGD once it's activated. So your net change is you're going to go from 27 MGD to 32 MGD after these agreements expire and the new water treatment plant is built. So just to give you some perspective about the things that are happening here soon. So we're going to look at water treatment capacity, and just for interest, I'm going to show them to you with those same 3 alternatives that we looked at. Option 1 is what we're going with, what we're recommending, but wanted to just present this to you for interest. So when we're looking at water treatment plant capacity, there's 2 things we look at. One is average day demand. So you can think of that at over a year. That's what an average day would look like. There is a state planning threshold. Once you reach 80% of plant capacity on average day, you have to initiate some planning activities. That's a South Carolina requirement. That's applicable to the Catawba plant. It's not applicable to the Yadkin plant. Second thing we're going to look at is maximum day demand. So we don't want the maximum day demand to exceed the plant capacity. So that's the second bit we're going to look at. And we're going to compare it for all 3 of these alternatives. All right, so system configuration, our baseline, again, this is with no modification, just the blue areas are Yadkin, green areas are Catawba. What happens here, everything we're presenting, is these are the projected average day demands, ADD, and maximum day demands for 2025 through 2040. So looking at the Catawba River first, your capacity is 20 MGD, and then this 4th line is showing what the projected demands are for both average day demand and maximum day demand. So for the Catawba River, you're almost at 80% by 2025. For average day demand. And you're actually projected to potentially exceed maximum day capacity by 2025 for Catawba under this option. So that's just kind of a big takeaway for Catawba. For Yadkin, you're in pretty good shape throughout the whole horizon for both average day flow and maximum day. You're well under the plant's capacity. All right, switching over to option 1, and remember this is shifting flow from Catawba to Yadkin, and the subsequent one will as well. The picture gets a little bit better. You're not hitting 80% on average day until 2030, but even with that shift in flow, you still have the potential of exceeding plant capacity as max day by 2025. Yadkin looking pretty good across the board, but you can see the Yadkin percentages increasing because they're taking on a little more flow than the other alternative. Finally, option 2, which is the biggest shift in flow from Catawba to Yadkin. So for this one, average day for Catawba looks pretty good almost till 2040. You're still potentially exceeding Catawba's capacity by 2025, but by a lesser degree than the other alternatives. Yadkin is still looking good capacity-wise, but you do tap over that 100% mark in 2040. So that's what it looks like. taking all this in total and coming back to the system configuration, from a compliance with interbasin transfer, option 1 is really the only option. The other 2 aren't compliant with your IBT certificate. If we were to only look at maximizing the use of each water treatment plant, option 2 is actually a little bit better because it does a better job of shifting the flow over to Yadkin, but it's just not possible because of the IBT restrictions. So just wanted to present that. Okay. I will keep going. We're going to talk about wastewater, so if y'all want to talk about water, we can come back to that, or anybody have any questions? All right. So wastewater treatment capacity. So your sewer system, this is just a quick overview. Over here to the far west, you have the 6 Mile Creek area. 6 Mile Creek is served by Charlotte, where the treatment is handled by Charlotte Water. It goes up there via gravity flow to get to the 6 Mile pump station and eventually goes to Charlotte Water. Then you have your largest basin, the 12 Mile Creek Basin, which includes the 12 Mile wastewater treatment plant. Crooked Creek Basin, which includes the Crooked Creek treatment plant. Popland Road Pump Station, and recall Popland Road pumps to 12 Mile via that pinkish purple force main. Then you have your 3, what we would call package plants, small plants to the north, Old Sycamore, Tallwood, Grassy Branch. And then finally, you have East Side, which sends its flow over to the Monroe treatment plant. Commissioner Rushing, just from earlier, you can see that distance between that plant and Poplands is a pretty good ways in reference to what Mr. Matthews said earlier. And just for your information, we've got over here on the right, this is a listing of the plant permitted capacities as well as the agreement, capacity by agreement for places like Monroe and Charlotte. All right, so for wastewater treatment, we look at 2 different things.
Real quick, can you go back that last slide?
Mhm.
So the Charlotte Water for the 6 Mile, we have 3 million gallons a day, but we can't access all that?
So they have indicated that if we need 3 million gallons, they will supply us with 3 million gallons. What they have indicated, though, is that they do not have capacity in their plant to accept more than that if we would want more. And it would take some infrastructure improvements in order to even send more if they could give us more. So that's what they've told us.
So we can do 3, we can't do 3.5?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
One other bit of information will be important here in a second is another capability of your system is that you can send some flow from 12 Mile to 6 Mile. You have what's called a diversion pump station in force main. So you can take flow from 12 Mile Creek and send it to 6 Mile and eventually to Charlotte. It's an operational decision that can be made. So the capability's there. You've tended not to do that recently, and it'll be important when we look at some slides later just to point out that functionality.
Okay.
All right, so we look at 2 different things in terms of treatment plant capacity. First, we look at annual average daily flow. That's the average daily flow for any given year. The reason that's important is there is a state requirement called the 80-90 rule, if you're familiar with this. And what that says on an annual average daily flow basis, once you reach 80% of the plant's capacity, you have to have completed evaluation and planning for whatever you're going to be doing, building a new plant, expanding it, whatever the solution is. That's an important trigger, 80%. Once you reach 90% of the plant's capacity, and again, that's on an annual average daily flow basis, you have to have permitting and design complete. So basically be ready to construct is the way it's written. And it uses this annual average daily flow basis. So that's why this is in its own column. The other thing we look at is we compare the maximum month flow to the permit capacity. Now, maximum month flow, it just happens to be the way most treatment plants are permitted. So if you think about it in a calendar year, every month has its own average flow, right? And that can vary principally by rainfall is what changes it. So you don't want any individual month exceeding the permit limit, is basically what that means. So that's the second piece that we look at. And so we want to be compliant with both, but they're two different things, two different flow units that can be a little tricky to get your hand around sometimes. All right, so I'm going to present this as a summary. I've got the detailed information. We can go through it as well as you like, but let's go through the summary and see if we want to drill into it. So this is presented in order of least, I guess, kind of place we probably need the most attention. So for your 3 package plants, Old Sycamore, Tallwood Estates, and Grassy Branch, you have sufficient capacity through 2040 for all 3. Tallwood Estates, we do want you to continue to monitor I&I. You've had our inflow and infiltration. You've had a project to remove a lot of that. And Grassy Branch does have a pending expansion, but once that's in place, you should be in good shape. East side, you currently are at risk of exceeding that agreement based on flow projections, but the city of Monroe is in design for that plant expansion. Once that's done, you're going to acquire more capacity via agreement, and we can look at what that specifically means.
How much are we,
0.7.
700,000 gallons is what we've contracted.
what we have?
And you're
And
talking about.
how much are we exceeding that, or at risk of exceeding that?
Let me fast forward.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't mean-
It's a future risk is what he's saying, like not right now.
Right, if we keep building and
Mhm.
past that 700,000, then we could potentially go over our risk.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so looking at 6 Mile, so as Brian mentioned, there's not additional capacity to expand that agreement going to Charlotte, and there is currently risk of exceeding that agreement based on flow projections. One thing that has changed relatively recently is the county has reduced the amount of diversion flows you're sending. Remember I mentioned that the 12-mile plant has that capability of sending flows. You guys have really throttled that back a lot, and that has brought the flows down somewhat. So there's kind of some good and bad there, I guess. The Crooked Creek plant, remember this is one that kind of would have assumed to have been decommissioned with the new facility in place, but this one you'd be at risk of exceeding the max month flow starting in 2025, and you would reach that 90% threshold we talked about earlier by 2035, and put 90% in here because that's the one that really requires you to have the design and permitting in place. And finally, the 12-Mile Creek facility, you're currently at risk of exceeding the max month flow permitted capacity, and you would reach 90% of annual average daily flow by 2027 at the 12-mile facility, based on these projections.
And I just want the board to understand that this is based on actual flows. This is not based on actual plus what we permitted. So it is very possible that we will actually max out our permitting capacity long before 2025 or 2035 and 2027 for those projects. This is based on what they estimate the actual flows will be over time, but we cannot permit above what the plant is actually rated for.
All right. Let me walk you through some of the graphs, and we can come back to this. Y'all have got that information in front of you if you want to look at it in more detail, but I did want to give you kind of a primer on how to read what you've got in front of you. So these next 2 slides are just explaining what's going to be on the subsequent graphs for each plant. So what you'll see is these blue dots. These are the actual measured, historical annual average daily flow for each plant. The blue solid line is the projected flows for annual average daily flows. So that's assuming, based on whatever growth we're expecting in that basin. You'll also see a gray dashed line and a black dashed line. The gray is 80% threshold, the black is 90%. So whenever a blue crosses one of those two, that means you're crossing one of those 2 thresholds. So that's one piece of information that'll be on these graphs. We're also going to be showing you the maximum month data. So similarly, you'll see some points, they're green squares. That's actual max month flow data for whatever plant we're going to be looking at. The solid black line is the permitted capacity, and then the green band is the projected max month flow. The reason we give that to you as a band is because it's highly dependent on weather. So it can go up and down. So we present it to you as a range rather than as a single line, just so it's understood that can be highly variable. The way we picked the range is we looked at your historic maximum and minimums to figure out what the band should be. So that's what we're going to be looking at. I'll go quickly through the package plants just because they're not a real concern for us. So Old Sycamore's fine. You're well below all those thresholds. Tallwood Estates, this is one I will point out that you do see this green band being above the plant capacity, but this is a basin where you recently finished a lot of that inflow and infiltration reduction, and we've already seen it come down some. We just don't have enough data yet to give you that number, so we've left it based on the projection of previous data, but we know that you've made some improvements that are going to bring that flow down. So it's just something that needs to be monitored.
So this has sufficient capacity through 2040. Those houses that are there are going to be there till hopefully 2060 or 70 or 80.
Understood. We say 2040 because that's the limit of the study, but this is a basin we're not expecting growth,
Yeah.
so.
You're not
yes,
adding houses there.
Correct, we're
Yeah,
not.
They're there, they're built, they're what they are. Only thing there is just repair and replacement for the existing homes.
Correct, yep.
Thank you.
All right, so just need to keep an eye on I&I here because we just don't have enough data to trend that. Grassy Branch, another one of the package plants, we're expecting this expansion to be complete by 2027. Once that's in place, everything is below all three thresholds, not concerned. East Side, we mentioned earlier. So East Side does not show the 80-20 rule, the 80-90 rule, because the 80-90 rules apply to the whole plant, not to the agreement. So we're just showing you what your agreement limit here is, the solid black line. So right now, you do have some risk of exceeding, you can see some of that green is above the black line. You do have some risk of exceeding the agreement. But once the design is complete, you're going to gain that 700,000 gallons, and that's why this line is bumping up in that staircase fashion, and you'll be back under for a while, and then the risk picks back up for East Side. One thing that I'll point out is this is an estimated construction date. They just started this project, so this is an estimate 2028. We aren't positive really what the end date on that is, but that's an estimate. All right, 6 Mile. So again, this is by agreement, so you don't see the 80-20. So you can see that the projected flows, there's not a lot of growth in 6 Mile. So it's not increasing by much, but you have this really big range up here for maximum month flow. This is a basin that's highly variable because of the way it's operated with flow coming from 12 Mile. So if the 12 Mile diversion stays low or ceases, you might see this band shrinking and possibly coming down a bit. But nonetheless, you're currently at risk of exceeding the agreement just because of we hadn't had enough runtime. But you can clearly see since 2020, you've had some drops in the flow. So it is holding. Crooked Creek. So this is a capacity a little shy of 2 MGD. So right now, you are, don't exceed 80% until like 2030. And don't exceed that 90% threshold until 2035. By 2025, you could start exceeding that maximum month flow threshold for Crooked Creek. And again, this is showing the projected growth in that Crooked Creek basin. All right, so last one is 12 Mile. So for 12 Mile, several things here. You are basically at 80% capacity now at that plant. You will be at 90 by about 2027. You're currently at risk of exceeding maximum month flows. And in fact, in January of 2021, you had a flow violation at that plant. All right, so that's all the details. Anything you guys want to drill into or know any more about?
Any questions?
All right. Well, next steps, so we'll be back here at the next meeting to look at pipes and pumps for the capacity assessment, and we're starting to pull together draft CIPs to resolve current capacity issues. So that's it. Got time for questions, or thank you for your time.
Sorry. Regarding the next steps, develop the draft CIP to resolve current capacity issues. Are we looking to get information on that at our May 1st meeting, or is that something that's going to be a little bit?
That'll be future. We're targeting May 15th to
Great.
have that list. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
To members of the board, one of the takeaways I want you to think about is, obviously, with the Catawba River plant, and that's the water side, not the wastewater side, there is going to be pressure for that plant to be expanded in the very near future, and not just from us, but also from Lancaster Water and Sewer. We are a partner in that, and we've been fortunate that every year we've needed, or every time we've needed an expansion on that plant, they've been willing to go along and partner with us on that expansion. It may very well be that Lancaster will need that expansion before we do, but we will likely need that expansion as well, because as Jay pointed out, we are relying on the IBT, and obviously in order to manage that, we still have to be able to have enough water in the Catawba to push water over the boundary over there into the Adkins side. So just be aware that that is a consideration we're going to have to think of in the future, is the capacity of that water treatment plant.
All right. Other questions? Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.
Let's see. Is this one going to be a long one, Brian?
It's gonna probably be
It should be
30
shorter.
plus minutes.
Well, shorter than what you just
Anybody
saw.
need to take a recess?
Want to take a short break?
We can do it after this one if it's not going to be that long.
I mean, this is gonna be about
We'll do
30
it.
to 40
Okay,
minutes.
we'll do it after this one if everybody's good with it.
Well, this is the last item, technically. Well, no, you got the, I'm sorry, you do have the wastewater committee.
So
Water committee.
that slide, that presentation's only one slide, so if you did want to do it, probably now would make more sense.
Okay. Let's take a 5-minute recess.
Yeah.
Be back in your seats at 7:07, 7:08.
Andy, they're taking a 5-minute recess. They'll be back, well, they'll be back in 5 minutes, after the 5-minute recess. Can you hear us? Can you hear us okay? on the public comment period and everything else in the time that we have remaining. So we actually do need a decision today, and that is an important thing that Andy Burnham is going to tell you. So Andy Burnham is, he works for Stantec, which is the sort of the modeling, financial modeling, utility modeling company that works with us on a lot of our rates, fees, charges as it relates to the financial operations of a utility. And so we're pleased that he can work with us. He did the study 5 years ago, so this is really almost in just the next chapter and add-on to the work that he's been doing for us. And so I'm trying to sort of stall as much as I can, but I've run out of words to explain what they're doing for us. Deborah is working with Andy, and she is also part of the team that we've been fortunate enough to work with. I don't know what else there is to say other than I can tell you what my kids did over spring break if that kills some time.
Unless they dug some water pipelines. Brian, you got anything to say, add to it?
No, I think that's probably about all.
It's gonna get awful boring if Andy don't call in soon.
Yeah, well, we're just waiting for Andy to call in at this point.
Do you want to try it?
Hold on a second, guys. I think we're going to ask Patrick to do it. Well, hold on. Andy Burnham, give it a try.
All right, is this any better, Hung?
It is better. It's better enough that I say have at it, and you're going to hear a sigh of relief from Brian Matthews, so go ahead.
Okay, great. I apologize again, commissioners, for the audio difficulties. So can everyone still see the presentation okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, very good. Well, by way of just a brief agenda, I've got a few things I wanted to cover today on the system development fees. Just a bit of background about system development fees in general, and a refresher on the last time these were looked at in 2018. And then just go over the current requirements in the Public Water and Sewer System Development Fee Act and what that's led to in terms of current methodologies and North Carolina practices. Then get into some of the things we're seeing in the updates for this year's system development fee analysis, and then ultimately kind of wrap things up, go over some benchmarking, and tee up what we really need some direction from the board upon in terms of how we proceed with the study. So by way of background, in 2018 was the last time the water and sewer system development fees were evaluated. And that was again done in conformance with the Public Water and Sewer System Development Fee Act that was passed right before then. At the time, the fees were based on the cost of the existing system plus the incremental cost of capacity associated with several expansion projects, notably Yadkin for the water side, as well as City of Monroe additional capacity, expansion of 1.5 MGD at 12 Mile Creek, and there was an assumption of a new wastewater treatment plant of 3 MGD for the lower Crooked Creek Basin. And as a result of that study, the current fees that are in place today that are highlighted at the bottom were adopted and put into place. For water, it's a $3,200 per equivalent residential unit or 3/4 inch meter, and for sewer, it's $4,200 per 3/4 inch meter. So in total, for a new connection, that would be $8,400 for a typical residential connection. Now, the system development fee study is governed by some pretty specific statutes in North Carolina. As I mentioned, the Water and Sewer System Development Fee Act was passed in 2017, and it's been amended a couple of times. And I'm not going to go through each of the check marks on this slide in too much detail, but it is very prescriptive in terms of what we have to do relative to documentation of data, notation of limiting conditions and assumptions, providing the basis for the fee calculations in terms of the methods applied, and making sure that we have certain credit calculations in conformance with typical industry practices for future capital improvements. It does specify that we cannot cover less than 5 years and no more than a 20-year planning horizon, and that before moving forward with any updates and fees, there needs to be a 45-day period of public commenting and a public hearing prior to their formal adoption. And the state statute does indicate that the fees and the analysis should be updated at least every 5 years. So you can update it certainly more frequently, but no less frequently than every 5 years. So the calculation itself is seemingly straightforward, but there's a lot of devil in the details, so to speak, where we take the value of the system, whether that's for the existing assets and or future capital improvements, And from that, we then have to provide credits for any outstanding debt, recognize any grants we received for those projects, as well as contributions from developers. And for future capital improvements or investments, we need to make sure that that credit is at least 25% of the cost of those improvements that we're including in the basis of the fee. And we divide that net cost basis, if you will, by the system capacity. And depending upon the method, that would be the capacity of the existing system and or any future capacity that would be provided by the planned capital improvement projects. Now, slide 6 is where I do need to go into a bit of detail to make sure we have a common understanding of the methodology options that we have in front of us. So the Act is very specific about the 3 methods that could be used to calculate system development fees and how those funds can be used if that methodology is selected. So the first option is the buy-in method. And that method is really looking at trying to recover capital costs that you've previously incurred that have capacity to serve new growth and development. So that's very appropriate for systems that have capacity in their existing system that will be utilized to serve growth over the next few years. And in that concept or in that methodology, the use of the system development fees can be used for expansion as well as rehabilitation projects. And this is because the buy-in method is really serving to reimburse the system for past investments. And so those proceeds can be used for all types of capital projects. The second option is looking really prospectively into the future improvements needed to serve growth. And those improvements would be new facilities or expanding the capacity of existing facilities to be able to meet the needs of new development in the future. And this is certainly appropriate for systems that have very limited or no excess capacity to serve development over the next few years. The Act is very specific about the types of costs that the incremental fee method could be used to cover in terms of the future capital improvement related projects. But one of the amendments to the Act actually did say that if you don't have any capital improvement projects in the next few years, you can use the proceeds or the revenues under the incremental method to cover some debt that may have been related to existing capital improvements. And the last method is a hybrid approach where we may have some excess capacity to serve new growth for a period of time, but we also have significant growth-related projects in our capital improvement program. And so these fees are based upon a combination or weighting of our existing asset value and future planned improvements. And so the funds that are collected using fees based on the combined method follow the incremental method, but they can also be expended for previously completed capital improvements for which the capacity exists and for capital rehabilitation projects. So throughout North Carolina, again, this was a survey that was done a few years ago, but what we found was that in the University of North Carolina Environmental Finance Center found, I should say, was that many communities were looking at the buy-in method for establishing their fees at the time, and then also, followed by the combined method. Again, as I mentioned, Union County's current fees reflect the combined method, as that was calculated in 2018. And what's also important about the methodologies is also how you charge the fees. You could charge these based on fixture units or estimates of demand, square feet, but the most predominant and common method is to scale them based upon the size of the meter, which is Union County's current practice. And the other consideration that we often see with system development fees are, do we go up to and set the fees at the maximum amount that's calculated through studies like this? And 2/3 of the systems that were surveyed in 2019 charged the maximum amount that was calculated from a study such as this. And again, Union County is charging the analysis maximum results from the 2018 study that was done. So now at this point, I do want to shift gears to where we sit today. So as we sit here today updating the system development fee study, we're looking at your current assets as of 9/30/22 plus construction work in progress. We do have the Yadkin plant fully factored into this analysis, but we also have to recognize the outstanding debt for that plant as part of the calculation, and the fact that we also have limited expansion-related capital in terms of new facilities or expansion of capacity of existing facilities in the capital improvement program that we've been looking at over the last few months as part of the rate evaluation process. And we also updated our system capacity for the Yadkin plant and overall for the water system. But we don't have any expansion projects in the present 5-year water CIP, And we did look at some alternatives for the sewer system, however, that did incorporate potential expansions of the 12-mile treatment plant as potential options for consideration. So when we look at the water system development fee, given that we don't have really expansion-related projects over the next 5-year planning period, we really didn't look at the incremental or combined method and really needed to focus on the buy-in method, the cost of our existing assets and work in progress. And in that approach, we have to give credit for any outstanding principal that will be repaid by rates for those assets to come up with our net system value. And then as we divide that by our capacity, expressed in equivalent residential units, and escalate that to $2024 for the fiscal year in which the fees will be implemented, we come up with a calculated fee of $1,678 per ERU, which is less than the current fee per ERU. And the reason that we see a significant reduction is because we have really a significant asset, the Advocate plant, that's heavily leveraged with debt as we sit here today. As we move forward in time, we'll continue to buy and really enhance our equity in that plant, which all else being equal would cause this buy-in method and results to go up over time. As we look at the sewer system for kind of the baseline capital scenario without any facilities or expansion of capacity, the buy-in method, again, would similarly be a reduction over the current fee, which is based on the combined method that included some expansion of facilities in it. So when we run through a similar process and approach, we come up with a current fee calculation for sewer that would be $2,473 per equivalent residential unit, which would be a reduction from the current fee of $4,200, or about 41%. However, as I mentioned, we did look at scenarios of potential expansions being included in a 5-year capital improvement program. The first scenario that we looked at was to say expanding the 12-mile facility from 7.5 million gallons a day to 9 million gallons a day. And if you look to the middle column on this slide, you'll see that that incremental approach now would have $47 million of cost as presently estimated for that expansion. We'd meet the minimum statutory revenue credit with a $12 million credit assumption. And then when you do the math, that would result in an incremental fee of $6,412 per ERU, which would be a little over a 53% increase over the current fee today. And if we were to look to the combined approach, factoring in a weighting of the buy-in and the incremental dollars and capacities, you can see that the combined method result would be $2,823 per ERU, or about a 33% reduction from the current fee. And we did take this one step further to say, well, if we were looking at perhaps a slightly longer planning period, or wanted to include the full expansion of the 12-mile facility to 12 MGD, that would result in an incremental cost of about $102 million for 4.5 MGD of capacity. And so that incremental method fee would be about $4,634 or $4,200 versus the fee of $4,200 today, or about a 10% increase. And because it's more dollars, when we weight that with the buy-in method, that combined fee calculates out to about $2,962 versus the current fee of $4,200. And it's important to note the expansion to 12 MGD, that estimate was provided in Q1 of 2021, so that would be a number that would probably need some refreshing and some updating as part of consideration of this potential option. So then what we wanted to do was to kind of bring this back to an understanding of these different calculations and system development fee options in the context of the impact to future water and sewer rates. And so prior to this analysis, we had done projections of water and sewer rate increases that were based on the revenue from the existing system development fees from the prior study. And so in a couple of different scenarios we looked at, with no expansion of 12-mile, with the current SDF revenues, we're getting about $6.3 million of system development fee revenue per year. And in that scenario, the annual water and sewer rate increases are about 2% per year. And then if we looked at a scenario where it include the expansion to 9 MGD, funded with a combination of fund balance and borrowing, that increase would be about 1.5% per year, recognizing that we would have some additional growth coming in with that particular plan expansion. Well, then what we did is updated that financial plan and forecast to say, well, what happens now if we look at new system development fees based upon the buy-in method as scenario 1, or looking at what the rate model would say if we did an expansion to 9 MGD, would water again following the buy-in fee in the sewer system development fee based on the incremental method, or kind of a B version of that scenario if we continue to use the combined method for the sewer fee. And so in that option, you can see in the second to the right column, the 2024 system development fee revenue projections. Under scenario one, with the new buy-in fees being about half of what they were before, we now would need 2.5% increases to water and sewer rates, as opposed to what was 2% with the current system development fees. If we look to scenario 2A, where we would include the expansion to 9 MGD for 12 mile, and use the incremental method for sewer, the fees are about the same. So we capture about $6.3 million of system development fee revenue, and we'd be able to continue to have a 1.5% increase for that same scenario of planned capital expansion. In scenario 2B, however, if we use the combined method, that sewer fee would still drop from $4,200 to $2,823, and so we would have a significant reduction in our system development fee revenue that would correspondingly result in an increase in water and sewer rates of 2% per year instead of 1.5%. And just for information items, we did also run the scenario that said if 12 mile was expanded to 12 MGD, if we assume that incremental fee of $46.34, that would result in 3% annual rate increases. And so in the context of current local fees, we wanted to just give you a snapshot of water system development fees for one equivalent residential unit or a 3/4 inch meter, and show you just where you stand today and give you some context to place these results that we're coming up with from the study thus far. And so you can see your current water fee is $3,200, and it's towards the upper end of the survey of the entities that we have here, so certainly higher than Wingate and Monroe, as well as Charlotte. And then if we look at the sewer side, we also are towards the upper end of the survey as well on the sewer side, again above Charlotte, Wingate, some of the other local communities. And so when we combine the two things today, you can see our current fee would add up to $7,400 per ERU as compared to several of the other agencies. Again, we're towards the upper end of the survey, certainly within the range of the survey, but towards the upper end. And so where we find ourselves at this point, for the water system development fee, absent new expansion related projects to include, we're in a situation now where we don't have a significant amount of equity in the Yadkin plant yet because the debt was recently issued. So over time, that equity will increase. We'll be able to increase that fee going forward, but at present, we don't have much equity to be able to build a fee off of, nor any expansion projects in the CIP to speak of at this point. The sewer system development fee, as I've shown, is significantly impacted by the selected capital plan and the methodology. And overall, the lower system development fees, all else being equal, would result in about 0.5% increase in the rate increases above prior forecasts. I say all else being equal, there may be other things that could offset or exacerbate those impacts, but just in isolation, that's what that equates to. And so what we're looking for today is, direction on the capital plan and corresponding system development fee methodology to determine final calculations to include in the report, and to then start proceeding down the statutory requirements path of making sure we have the public comment period and coming back to a public hearing prior to any sort of formal adoption. And so I think that's really what we're looking for today, is to certainly answer any questions and have discussion, but to make sure that, we're able to get that direction so we can move forward and stay in conformance with the Act.
Anyone have a question? I have one. So, there's a Senate bill out there now, and I guess this is for Andy, that says that if it's called affordable housing, we may not be able to collect a system development fee at all. Of course, that wasn't figured into these numbers. What effect would that have if we could not charge the system development fees on the rates?
So I may need that question repeated, but I think it was relative to affordable housing and what impact that would have to revenue projections on our financial plan if we had a significant extent of that. Is that the question?
Yes, actually, Andy, I don't think he could hear you on your mic. So, Andy, the question was, there's a Senate Bill 317 that's out there that, if passed, would eliminate the jurisdiction from collecting system development fees for workforce housing projects. Not all development projects, but those that qualify for workforce housing. And or first off, have you had any, you evaluated that in any way as far as the impact of our system development fee analysis that you've done?
No, we haven't evaluated that. This analysis was really focused on updating the unit cost to update the fees themselves, and then the revenue projections that we did still continued with the same ERU growth assumptions from the most recent rate study. We really didn't run any sensitivities on, if a certain extent of that was, for workforce housing, how that would impact the revenue stream. We need a little bit of guidance and some dialogue maybe with you and the planning department just to get a sense of, what that order of magnitude might be, but we could certainly run those scenarios. We just haven't done that to date.
Yeah, so the challenge is going to be, we have no idea how many projects could qualify for that. Is it 1 or is it 50? And that's really it'd be difficult for us to quantify that and give you a number. And so honestly, it's a swag, and even that, I wouldn't want to give you one because it would be way off.
Yeah. The other thing he had discussed, and I'll keep it short so you can explain it to him, is the Yadkin water plant, because we don't have equity in it, even though it's built, and a 33% rate increase was presented to pay for it.
Sure.
The water goes down, the water system development fee. So, and until we start paying it off, it can't go up. But once we start paying it off, it will go up?
That's correct. So yeah, and Andy, what he's asking about is that whole calculation for the credit that has to do with the debt that goes for the Yadkin project, how that affects our system development fee for water, and also the fact that we don't have any capital projects for expansion for water currently in the CIP. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, both of those things are the reason why we're seeing the reduction in the water fee from its current levels to what we've calculated here. And as we go forward in time, to the extent we were to add, quote, capital improvements as they're defined in the Act that are new facilities or expansion of facilities that add capacity to the system, that, would serve to give us a basis to update the fee in the future to include those costs. And then even if that doesn't occur, as we move forward in time, and continue to make principal payments on the debt that we incurred for the Yadkin plant, that's going to enhance our equity in the plant so that when we do that credit calculation a few years from now, we're going to have less of a credit for that outstanding principal because it will be smaller. And again, all else being equal, that means the fee will come up as we start to build more and more equity in the plant.
Right. Part of our challenge is we're a fairly young system, and when you're young, we have a lot of debt, but we don't have a lot of equity. So that's part of the challenge.
Anybody else have a question? I guess I would have another one then. What happens when we build a sewer plant and we're not paying the principal on it? I mean, does that fee go down right when we need it? Because this seems awful backwards to me.
So
that when we need the money, we have to lower it.
Right, and I'll let Andy speak to that in just a second. Andy, the question was if we do actually expand the wastewater treatment plant and we do that project, then if we take debt out on that project, how does that affect that system development fee in the future when we need to also collect for that?
Yeah, and I think it'll be an interesting conversation to see, is it a singular plant expansion or would there be potentially additional future expansions? So if we look at, one expansion at a time, we could have a similar dynamic occur with the water where as it's a planned improvement, we can include that planned improvement in the cost basis of our fee, and statutorily, we only have to give a credit of 25% of that cost, recognizing the future revenue that would come from customers to go towards that through rates and other sources. And so that's why I think in the planning horizon, to the extent permissible, the Act authorizes you to use a 5 or 20-year planning period for your capital improvements intentionally, such that you could include those costs in your fee and start doing some advanced planning for those. But to the extent that we're not able to do that and start to have a long enough runway to collect fees in advance of the plant, then the dynamic would be what we're talking about now here with Yadkin, where, for a few years, we'd be able to include those costs, 75% of them effectively in the basis of the fee. But then once it becomes an asset in service, it'll depend on how we paid for that in terms of cash versus debt financing. And that would then affect the fee methodology going forward, unless we had other expansion projects that would then come into the planning horizon that would allow us to keep the fee at the same or similar level.
So keep in mind that the proposal for the expansion for 12 Mile is using less debt to actually pay for that. We're actually using some cash, we're using some of our other funds that we have from reserves, and less debt to actually pay for that. So that would help in some degree. The water plant's a little bit different. It's almost all debt. So that's why there was such a big hit on that particular one. I'm not going to tell you that it won't have an impact. Obviously, when you adopt a system development fee study, it can be good for 5 years. So you can collect whatever it is up to that 5-year time frame, and then you have to do another study and evaluate that, look at what your capital plan is and all of those components of the methodology, and then you come up with what that rate is. So it could change. We're not going to know until we have a CIP developed for that new study, and we'll know what your assets are. So it's possible.
So the more cash we pay, the better?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That is true.
That's what I was.
That is true.
Yeah, from a system development fee calculation, I would agree with that.
Okay.
So one of the things that I wanted to point out to the board, and Andy said this, but we actually do need the board to take action on this item tonight. We will need you to select which one of these scenarios so that we can put this out to public comment. We can't put out choices to public comment. So if you wish to include a expansion to 12 Mile Creek, which therefore gives you a larger system development fee on your sewer side, you'll need to make that decision tonight so that then we can put that out for public comment, and then ultimately that will come back to you for adoption. That's fine. Also be aware that Andy did point out that your model actually reflects that if you make that decision, you will also need to make a decision in the future about rate increases. You cannot sustain an expansion to the plant and any of the other things that are beyond that without a rate increase. Now, they were relatively small, but those are rate increases you would have to consider in order to meet our financial obligations. Again, the board can take the decision that you don't want to include those capital expansions, and therefore you have a much lower system development fee for both water and sewer. You could do that. You are not required to wait 5 years to do another study. You could do another study a year from now if you chose to, and you could have additional information that may change that system development fee at that time. But keep in mind that you have to be kind of committed to the decision you make. If you make a decision that you are going to collect a system development fee for expansion of 12 Mile Creek, then we have to move forward with that decision. If we make a decision that we are not going to collect that fee, you can later decide to expand the plant, but you won't be collecting that higher system development fee until you redo your study and have that evaluated.
So what I'm hearing, and this is what we've discussed in some earlier meetings, but from what I'm hearing tonight, 53% increase in the system development fee
For sewer.
paid for by the new home buyer
That's correct.
in the county versus a 1.5% increase to the citizens who live here. So
And-
instead of a 22% increase that we cut back, you're
Yes,
looking
sir.
at a 1.5% increase and then a 53% increase on the developer passed through to the new home buyer.
That is correct, yes, sir. And keep in mind, though, that this is only an expansion to 12 Mile Creek. This does not include the short line program. Remember, that is a separate capital need. So the 2022, and 2023 capital programs for short line are not included in that rate. You'd have to have an additional adjustment if you wanted to continue with those programs.
Correct, but that wouldn't be included in this study.
That is not included in the
Because it's
system
not an
development fee. That's
expansion,
correct.
it's
That
an
is just a
extension.
distribution, which is not really included in your system development fee
Right,
analysis.
that would be a completely
It's
separate.
not adding capacity, that's right.
Yes, sir.
Correct. Did you have a question? No?
So About a month or two ago, you presented some options to us that I'm not seeing tonight, and that's
Correct.
okay. So there was an option for a 1.5% increase, and then there was an option for a 1.75
Yes, ma'am.
increase. Was the short line in the 1.75 or no?
So originally, and keep in mind that we're not asking for a rate increase tonight. This is for system development fees, but we wanted to show you. So the way it was broken down is 1.5 was for the expansion of 12 Mile Creek by itself. 1.75 is if you did Crooked Creek Interceptor as well as 12 Mile Creek. And then 2% was if you did all three, the program for the short line, the Crooked Creek Interceptor, as well as the 12 Mile expansion. However, because your system development fee can increase, because if you choose the 12 Mile Creek expansion, you choose the system development fee, which is larger, we can actually get your increase to 1.75%, and you would be able to do all three with a 1.75% increase. That's because you've realized a higher system development fee.
And Brian, what I understand too is like if we do get money from the state to go into either of these projects to build that equity up, that could offset, and we could use that money somewhere else.
That certainly helps as well.
Yeah.
And I do, again, I want to make clear, I'm talking about only 2 more years of the short line program. Future years, you would have to do something different. This is only for 2022 and 2023.
Right.
You'd have to decide something different if you wanted that program to continue. Rates are not set aside to cover future program amounts.
And one of the things we're going to be covering later on tonight is a committee of citizens to help us come to some of those decisions, whether we do it by a bond referendum, whether we do it in some other manner. Let those citizens who need the water look at that and say, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, see the cost associated with it and where we go. But so there's some potentials here. You know, I'm in favor of the higher system development fee for the sewer. It'll be paid immediately. We don't wait on the expansion. It starts this year.
That's correct. So it would essentially go into effect in July. We have to do your 45-day comment, then you do your adoption, which will be in June, and then it will take effect, I believe, July. Is that correct? So take effect in July. That's when that officially would go into place. We are, again, not asking the board to consider a rate increase tonight. That will come. If you do select the higher system development fee, we will be bringing you a rate increase for the board to make a decision on.
Of at least approximately 1.5%.
1.5 if you do not include the short line, 1.75 if you do include the short line.
Okay. Any
And-
questions?
Sorry, and Brian, you said that Crooked Creek would also be included? in
Yes,
that?
sir, and we're using some of the ARPA dollars to help cover that. That's helping to offset some of those costs.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help us with that equity, some of that equity we talked about?
Andy, does the ARPA dollars help us with equity as far as the any of the projects that we would build or expand?
Well, so we'll have to, it'll depend on the methodology. I mean, at this point, I think, we have to meet for prospective improvements, the 25% credit requirement. And then the act, indicates that if you use the buy-in method, you have to deduct outstanding debt, grants, and contributions. So, I think that may qualify as a grant potentially, but it may not. That may be a bit of a gray area that we have to explore just because the ARPA is a pretty unprecedented program.
And to be honest with you, I think if the board's given us direction, I would leave it the way it is. I would not try to move that target because obviously we're focused on getting that done, getting the easements acquired so we can move forward with it. So I would not recommend that we switch gears and try to put those dollars
I'm just
somewhere
curious
else.
about the equity part of it.
I don't know that it would help us or not, to be honest with you.
Don't want to get too great.
That's right. All right, any more questions for myself or for Andy?
No? Do you just need some direction?
Just need some direction, yes, sir.
Anybody want to make a direction or motion for direction? If you don't, I will. I mean, I would say that we go with the higher the highest fee, which would be which method, the buy?
So it would be the buy-in method for water, which is $1,680 roughly dollars. Actually, Andy's pulling it up, so $1,678, and that's the buy-in method for water. And then for sewer, it would be the incremental method, which is $6,412 for sewer. And you can actually have different methodologies for the different systems. And so that is
That's right.
perfectly fine.
All right, that would be the two I'd make the motion that we go with tonight. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I think that's all. We'll catch up with you later. Thank you, Deborah.
Okay. Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Next, we have 23-215 Water Solutions Advisory Committee. Patrick?
Thank you, Chairman. I only have one slide, so this should go fairly quick. A couple months ago, the chairman asked us to put some thought behind a advisory committee that would look at water solutions in Union County. So this is a framework for what we've talked about internally, and the point of tonight is to get some feedback from the board, ultimately put some criteria around this committee, and then advertise for members. So what we came up with is we think 12 is the maximum number of people we'd like to have on this committee. Anything bigger than that, and it gets a little unmanageable. Anything smaller than that, and you don't get a broad enough selection of members. Potential topics for discussion, rural water services, some of the grant opportunities, the short line program, special assessment programs, the countywide bond that was mentioned a few minutes ago. So those are just some of the topics we threw around internally that we could talk about with this group. We envision this group meeting once a month from August through December. That would be 6 meetings, and then coming back to the Board of County Commissioners in January with some recommendation. And that gives you enough time to consider those recommendations, and then if anything needed to be incorporated in the fiscal year 25 budget, it would give us that time. Again, this is just a snapshot of what we've come up internally, but we would say 2 members from the ag community, 2 members from the city of Monroe, since they are a water provider, 2 members from other municipalities within the county, and then 6 members at large from unincorporated Union County. So again, this is the framework we've come up with internally, trying to get some feedback from the board to move forward. We would probably advertise for at least a month for this for these members, come back to you all with whoever has submitted, and that would give us enough time to get these people kind of up to speed and in place for that meeting starting in August.
Okay, I guess I'd have a question about the city of Monroe. Since they have water, everybody in Monroe has water.
And in part of what municipalities can do is provide water outside of their service boundary, outside of their city limits.
Right.
So it's possible that they could provide water to some of the unincorporated Union County residents, and that's why we would include them. Just as they are a water provider, it's an opportunity that if there is some area they can serve that we can't, they could be included in that discussion. And we don't have to do that. Again, this is our, snapshot.
I would say that we try to hit, at least a requirement be that the people that are on the committee are not currently served by water, that it's people who can look at it from a standpoint of, I want water, I need water, I would desire water, but how much does it cost and how does it get paid for? So that's more of what the idea I would look at instead of including municipalities which have water. Now, if you have a municipality like Unionville, which doesn't have a lot of water, or Fairview, or even, I don't know how much Mineral Springs has.
Not a lot, and that's why we included 2 members from the municipalities for some of those more rural communities that don't have wide access to water.
And with the requirement probably that they not currently have county water.
Sure.
I don't want to, it wasn't that we were saying that they would be a staff from the municipality within the boundaries of the municipality. That's what we meant by that.
I would say maybe even take those 2 from Monroe, because we know everybody in the city of Monroe has water, or supposed to. Take those 2 from Monroe, add it to the municipalities and have 4 members from municipalities that don't have county water, that as citizens there don't have water.
Okay.
Any other recommendations from anybody on the board or discussions or any concerns?
Any additional topics that you all would like this group to possibly consider? And, we don't have to finalize that tonight, but just anything off the top of your mind, because as we advertise this group, we're going to try to advertise the extent to which this group would be discussing those topics.
Right. Do we, just like EMS board, do we need a commissioner or 2 on the board?
It's up to you, but if you'd like, I think that's a good way to communicate from the elected officials to this group, what the desire of the board is.
Yeah. I said, well, let's let them go with let's let them have the opportunity to hear what we hear. We've all heard it. And then let them do their decisions on a genuine basis. And then if a commissioner, if we need to send some commissioners, or maybe we have them come in here like a 2050 committee and give a discussion, or have them come in and hear us discuss it later after some of the findings. Maybe do it that way.
Yes, sir.
So I'll make the motion that we create the board and that we, with those changes to what you've got here, and we start putting out requests for people to come on. We've already got a good selection of people from people who have applied for short line extension programs and some that didn't qualify and things of that nature that, I would definitely put out to those folks that are interested. And then, of course, on social media and wherever else you're planning to advertise.
Sure.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So just for clarification, then, the changes that we're going to make are, we're going to keep 2 members from the ag community, we're going to strike 2 members from City of Monroe, and add those 2 members to the members of other municipalities that do not currently have water. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
citizens that live in the municipalities that don't have water.
Just a clarification, if there are residents of Monroe that don't have water, would you like them to be considered?
That would be fine.
Okay.
Everybody okay with that? All right.
Do we need to vote on that?
Yeah, no further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have county manager's comments. Brian Matthews.
I have no comments tonight, sir. Thank you.
Commissioner David Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to make a brief plug for an event tomorrow night sponsored by the Union County Library Foundation. It's called An Evening in Tuscany. It's at the Cedar Creek Ranch at 6:30. I understand there'll be a cocktail reception, there'll be an Italian-themed dinner, there'll be a book signing by a New York Times listed author. I understand it's going to be a really great event, and for folks that want to get tickets, please go to the Union County Library Foundation webpage, and you can obtain them. So again, that's at 6:30 tomorrow night at once again, the Cedar Creek Ranch. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Brian Helms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the speaker that spoke tonight during our public comment period. I believe it was Mr. Dexter. He had concerns, obviously, for SRO involvement with every single school here in Union County. That's been a topic, that's been of concern late, and I do appreciate him bringing his concerns to the board. I also appreciate Vice Chair Merrill's explanation of that. I thought that you had some great comments there, and obviously this is something that I feel like every member of this board has concern over. The safety of our kids. A price tag cannot be put on that, and I think that every single one of us feels very strongly that we have to have security measures in place for our children. That's all my comments. I appreciate the time from staff. And also, for Bjorn, I know Bjorn put a lot of effort into the Union County Express study. There was a lot of effort by staff in general for that. And yeah, thank you.
No comments? Well, apologize again to everyone for not wearing a tie tonight. My neck's a little stiff, so thank you for all the well wishes with the procedure I had today, and just still in prayer for Commissioner Richard Helms, and that he'll be joining us soon, and I hear that he is doing better. I'm hoping that he gets well fast and has a quick recovery, and with that, I will make a motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.